Welcome to UFHL Now! A close-up look at the ultimate fantasy hockey league. The most realistic fantasy gameplay. High stakes. High reward. Here's your host, the owner of Duckman's domination in the UFHL, and the mighty Mallards of the UFAHL, Dean Millard.
Hello there, and welcome to episode 20 of UFHL Now, where we cover the best league in fantasy because it deserves it. My name is Dean Millard, and we have a really fun show, massive loaded show for you tonight. We are going to take a look back at, or today, depending on when you're watching this, we'll take a look back at the expansion draft. I thought Brennen knocked it out of the park last night, not only with his picks, but with also making sure that things didn't leak out, because a lot of things leaked out when it came to the Kraken. So we have a wicked show, a lot of insider information. We'll recap some of the picks. We'll tell you about some of the news that's been happening. And who knows, maybe we'll even get some breaking trades during the show. This is the UFHL, where almost anything can happen at any time. As mentioned, Brennen did such a great job. I also want to say thank you to Larry Fisher, Andrea Karanduk, and a whole bunch of other people that made that show possible last night. I thought the production was very, very slick, and I had a small part of that. The real hard work was done by other people, so thank you to everybody involved in that. If you would like to be a part of the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network and be a part of some of this production that you see here on this program, hit us up at UFS Network on Twitter. You can email UFSN at UFFsports.com. You can check out the YouTube channel UFSN and see all of our past shows and wonderful production that we have for fantasy sports. And if you'd like to follow along with Duckman's domination, you can on Twitter at Ducks Domination. So on the program today, it is going to be pretty much all Larry all the time as the insider. We're going to get to a bunch of topics there, and then we will wrap up the show and get you ready for the draft auction and the futures auction. So let's get to him now. Our UFHL insider, Larry Fisher, now.
Time to get the scoop on the UFHL with our insider, Larry Fisher. He's had lines in the water all week long. What will he reel in for us today? Let's dive in and find out what's going on with the UFHL now.
As I welcome in the insider, Larry Fisher, for the UFHL. It's been so long since I chatted with you, Larry. It's good to see you again. So obviously we had what I think, and this will be a humble brag, I think it was a terrific show last night. I think Brennen was great. I think everything else was great, and the people that watched it certainly seemed to enjoy it, and I really enjoyed it. Even though doing some of the production, I knew some of the elements, it was still neat to see those names, and I wish I could have seen, and you could see it in our Telegram chat, the reactions as some of those picks and some of those trades came out. I think it was a smashing success by the Bentley Jacks.
Absolutely. Brennen killed it. Brennen Kopp, the general manager, in consultation with the co-owners, Darwin Osman and Drew McDonald, they really hit a home run here with the expansion draft. As we'll see, I may have made a couple different picks along the way, but certainly I don't think I could have come out with as good of a final roster as the Bentley Jacks did. I think the amount of work Brennen put in networking with every single GM and franchise owner in the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League, he was able to, he ended up making 19 trades with expansion implications and 25 total trades between March 1st and July 22nd. So the amount of work he put in was rewarded with the end roster, and had a couple gifts handed to him, or nice players fall into his lap due to some errors with the protected list. But all in all, I mean, I think Brennen did a fantastic job, and his owners can certainly be proud of his efforts as well as their own, and really bringing the Bentley Jacks to life.
All right, so the debate, as I said last night, can really begin now, because everybody's going to say, oh, maybe they should have taken this player, or I really like this trade, and things like that. And certainly there's a lot to discuss with Brennen's work. Let's start it, though. Let's go, as we get to the insider notes, Larry's mock versus Brennen's pick. It's a new game here. We have some lovely parting gifts for everybody involved. And we're going to run through some of the picks that Brennen made, and you can give your thoughts on, maybe you would take the same player, maybe it would be a different player. And let's start with Blades of Steel and the goaltender, Darcy Kemper, who, has proven he's a number one goaltender. Your thoughts on this pick?
I like this pick, Dean, and this should be a fun exercise. I know as soon as we put out the preview for the expansion draft, Colin Mills said, there's no Larry's mock. And the reason I didn't do a mock ahead of the expansion draft, Dean, is I didn't want to give away the players that I knew were going to be selected, or trades that were going to impact the decision. So I did do a mock just for myself, a personal mock of who I would take for the franchises that didn't have trades lined up. And then I know Brennan's really interested in this segment too, because he wanted to know, okay, who would have Larry taken in the same situation? So starting with the Blades of Steel, Dean, I went through the list, and I like Darcy Kemper. He was my pick as well. I think this was one of those ones where, I like Brennen said in the live show, Mikael Backlund's a quality player, maybe a bit overpaid, some young guys like Hayden Fleury, some guys that could be on the rise, get more opportunity in Seattle with Hayden Fleury. But at the end of the day, I think best player available from the Blades of Steel was Darcy Kemper. He would have been my pick as well.
All right, and I like the pick also. I had hoped Antti Ranta would become number one goaltender in Arizona, and it just never happened because of injuries and because Darcy Kemper. So I'm good with that pick, and there's lots of trade rumors still happening with all these guys. So some of these picks that Brennen has made could get even better depending on the situation. Now let's go to the Generals. Brennen selected Scott Mayfield. Your thoughts on that?
This was another one, Dean, where, in my opinion, it was sort of a slam dunk. I think Scott Mayfield was the obvious choice from the Generals. He was my selection as well. So we're 2 for 2 so far. Scott Mayfield, maybe a little bit of an unheralded defenseman with the Islanders, but certainly a quality contributor. You look at his contract. He's locked up at a nice low cap hit, cost-effective player, and contributes above what his cap hit is as far as fantasy points, and could be getting better if blocked shots and shorthanded time on ice were added as per offseason discussions. There's been a lot of talk about adding those two categories. So Scott Mayfield's value might go up even further, but certainly for the Generals, for Curtis Johnson and Harrison Fallow, that's certainly the player they didn't want to lose, but I don't think they would have been surprised that that was the player selected by the Bentley Jacks. When you look at the exposed list, it was pretty obvious to me that Scott Mayfield would have been my guy as well.
There were some really interesting moves. Some situations, owners made mistakes, and Brennen was able to capitalize on different things. And Sam Reinhart was his pick from the Eliminators. I know you found this one interesting.
Yeah, this was one of those illegal protected list situations where, unfortunately, the Eliminators didn't meet the minimum exposed requirements, because you needed to expose a goaltender that was under contract next season, or RFA. Both Tuukka Rask and David Rittich are UFA, so he didn't meet the minimum requirements. As a result, his entire protected list and exposed list become available to the Bentley Jacks, with the exception of no move clause with Alex Pietrangelo. So the Bentley Jacks were in a position of power where they could select any player from the Eliminators except Alex Pietrangelo. They made a side deal here, Dean, and they were able to. The Eliminators didn't want to lose Dylan Dubé, so they said pick any other player other than Dylan Dubé, and they couldn't lose any of their exempt players, and so then by process of elimination, Sam Reinhart's name jumped out from the pack. There were guys like Dylan Strome there. I mean, there were other quality options from that protected list on the Eliminators. I think it probably came down to Dylan Strome or Sam Reinhart, but likewise, I would have also taken Sam Reinhart. I think a change of scenery is coming for Sam Reinhart, whether that's Calgary or I've even heard Vancouver, but I don't think he's going to be long for Buffalo. I think with the Sabres rebuilding, Jack Eichel likely leaving, I think Sam Reinhart is a name we could hear on the move as early as today or this weekend at the draft. I think Sam Reinhart could find a new home, so I certainly think that's a selection that will improve next season for the Bentley Jacks. So again, 3 for 3. I also like the Sam Reinhart choice.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if if this scouting thing for UFHL doesn't work out, you could be Brennan's assistant GM because you guys are 3 for 3, and the Sabres are starting a rebuild from the rebuild that they were already doing. So we'll see how long that sounds. A lot like what happened in the Decade of Darkness in Edmonton. So very interesting. Okay, speaking of interesting, this is now where our little science experiment gets interesting because there is a difference between picks when it comes to what Brennen selected from Strong Island and what Larry would have selected from Strong Island.
And again, Dean, we have an illegal protected list came in here, and the issue here was Strong Island owner and GM Terry Weber and assistant GM Richard Phillips actually were under the impression that Kevin Lankinen was exempt because he was obviously a Calder candidate, first year in the NHL. But he had 3 seasons of pro experience in North America with his AHL time, which made him, they had to either protect him or expose him, and they had listed him as exempt. So as a result, a legal protected list, Kevin Lankinen was suddenly available for the Bentley Jacks, and they were planning to take Kevin Lankinen as a $800,000 starting goaltender. They really liked that idea. And of course, Strong Island didn't want to lose them. And this turned into the steal of the century because Strong Island was actually willing to give up Rasmus Dahlin with no compensation just to protect Kevin Lankinen and not lose Kevin Lankinen. So Kevin Lankinen has some high expectations. He had a great first season, but he's going to have to continue to be a 4+ point fantasy starting goaltender in the UFHL and for the Chicago Blackhawks in order to not have that decision perhaps come back to haunt them. But for Brennen, Rasmus Dahlin falling into the lap. And then with Kevin Lankinen now on the protected list or unavailable there, much like Dylan Dubé was for the Eliminators, they could pick anybody else from that exposed list. And they went with Jeremy Lozon, who I really like as a young up-and-coming defenseman in Boston. He was a guy that improved by leaps and bounds this year. I think he's still underrated. He's a legitimate top 4 young defenseman just entering his prime years. But the player that I would have taken a look at here, Dean, is Braden Holtby. And I know Braden Holtby has 1 year left. I think $4.3 million. He's in Vancouver, but lots of speculation with Thatcher Demko solidifying the #1 job in Vancouver that Holtby will be traded. There's a lot of teams that could have interest in Braden Holtby. And after this year, what does his contract do next year, right? I think Braden Holtby still has some good hockey left in him. I think he'll regroup and come back strong. So I know they took Darcy Kemper. I might have paired Kemper with Holtby, although then you're getting into that $10 million range in goaltending, which is, that's 1/8 of your cap in goaltending potentially. But I think I would have taken Braden Holtby, and if nothing else, I would have taken him with the intention of flipping him. And I think maybe that's where some of these picks we're going to get to are a little different. I might have taken a player who's more established with a bigger cap hit, knowing I have until October to flip them. And this isn't a knock on Brennen. This is more so a knock on Ron Francis. I would have, if I was Seattle's general manager, I would have definitely taken some of those bigger cap hits, whether it was Voracek or Van Riemsdyk from Philly or Tarasenko from obviously St. Louis, maybe a guy like Carey Price from Montreal. I would have taken on, I would have stayed under the cap ceiling, which they had to do, but I would have went a lot closer to the ceiling, and I would have planned on flipping those guys for better than what was available for the selections they made with certainly with Seattle. But with the Bentley Jacks, in this case, that might have been my plan. I might have looked around the league and seen there's going to be a hot market for Braden Holtby from other franchises. Let's take him here with the intention of flipping him. Or worst case scenario, we have Kemper and Holtby as a tandem. Both are going to be UFA next year. So maybe their contracts, their cap hits come down next year. And then you have a good veteran tandem on respectable contracts after this season. So I may have leaned towards Braden Holtby over Jeremy Lozon, but I do like Jeremy Lozon. I think that was a quality pick as well.
If we try to mirror as much as possible in the UFHL about the NHL, right down to an expansion draft and a live show. But I draw the line at mirroring bad production. If we were to mirror the NHL's live show, we would be announcing 2 trades today, or 1 trade like 24 hours after we did it or something. So I'm certainly glad we got all the action. And as you mentioned, Brennen did a much better job as far as making big explosive deals and exciting television and not leaking it than what happened with Seattle. So I tip my cap to Brennen for all of those things. And I'm loving this exercise. Let's move on to the Tornadoes. I like the rationale you're going with in this one.
Yeah, so the Tornadoes, this was a pick that Brennen agreed to. So he there was an agreement in place, a trade in place, that he would select Alex Bray-Boulet. But again, another illegal protected list came in here, Dean, where unfortunately for the Tornadoes, for Rob Love, he only had 1 forward that met the minimum requirements. He needed to expose 2 forwards that were under contract for next season and met the games played requirement. Matthew Highmore was the only one on his exposed list there that met that requirement, which again, like the Eliminators, opened up his entire protected list for selection. And there were a lot of players on that protected list for the Tornadoes, but the one that jumped out to me that I was surprised Brennen didn't hold Rob's feet to the fire a little more. Obviously, Drake Batherson was the big name. That was the name, confidentially, that Rob was terrified to lose. He didn't want to lose Drake Batherson. Yeah. But the name that popped for me, just knowing Brennen and knowing that he's from Regina. Regina hosted a Memorial Cup a few years ago. Sam Steele was the captain of that Memorial Cup team and such a big part. They also had Josh Mahura. Both Sam Steele and Josh Mahura are members of the Tornadoes. But for me, I thought Brennen would have held steady and demanded Sam Steele be the compensation. If you want to keep Drake Batherson, that's fine. I'm going to take Sam Steele as my guy. And actually, Brennen, again, as he mentioned in the live show, a lot of this is relationships. And him and Rob have a good relationship. He doesn't want to lose that for future trades. Maybe he still lands Sam Steele in a roundabout way somehow. But in order to select Alex Bray-Boulet, he was able to secure another top prospect in Marat Kuznetsov, who was a top center for Russia at the World Juniors and will be again this coming year, and potentially Kirill Kaprizov's Russian centerman in Minnesota in the years to come. So I think he did well getting Bray-Boulet, who's going to play a bigger role in Tampa with Yanni Gourde gone, and getting obviously the nice prospect in Marat Kuznetsov, who's probably a bit underrated overall. But in my mind, I probably, as much as I like Marat Kuznetsov, and I am relatively a fan of Bray-Boulet, I really think I would have, in Brennan's shoes, I couldn't have turned down the opportunity to take my hometown star or my hometown franchise player from the Regina Pats in Sam Steele. I think I would have held steady and selected Sam Steele from the Tornadoes.
Well, in a couple of years, I don't think he will do the same thing when Connor Bedard is up for draft, and he just happens to be the scout that has Connor Bedard. So he won't be doing that in a couple of years if he has the opportunity. What he did last night, which I thought was really cool, is he wanted to have some symmetry and some connection to what the Kraken did. And some of those picks he strategically made in that fashion.
And this was one with the Grizzlies where he actually had 2 options that he was really looking at, and he was waiting to see who Seattle selected from those 2 NHL franchises, because he knew those names were in the mix in the NHL as well. And Seattle selected Joonas Donskoi, and so the Bentley Jacks, they also had Kelly Yarncroc in a previously acquired deal who ended up becoming a Seattle Kraken, but they wanted Joonas Donskoi for that connection, and I think that's a really cool idea too. And Brennen said, Dean, in the live show that they were actually going to go a different direction here, that if they had to pick just strictly on value, that they would have picked perhaps a different player, but Joonas Donskoi was the pick. And I'm of the mindset that the best player available from the Grizzlies, and the player that I believe was the one Brennen would have taken, is Adrian Kempe from the Los Angeles Kings. I think he's really on the rise. He's got a tough roster there in LA with the amount of opportunity. I think I'm actually surprised Seattle took Curtis McDermott from LA instead of Adrian Kempe. When I seen that selection of Curtis McDermott, I almost fell off my chair, thinking there had to be a side deal. I mean, Curtis McDermott's a nice enforcer and everything, but he's in and out of the lineup, not even necessarily an everyday defenseman, a bottom pair for sure, where Adrian Kempe has that middle six upside. And realistically, I think Adrian Kempe could have been the William Carlson for Seattle had they selected him. I don't think Kelly Yarncroc has that. He's been in the league long enough. I don't think he has that breakout capability to get to 40 goals in his first year with Seattle, but I do think Adrian Kempe could have been that breakout star that plays way up the lineup from LA to Seattle and really stood out. And I think Adrian Kempe would have been my selection from the Grizzlies. But again, I like the idea that he went with the player that Seattle took in Joonas Donskoy, and I think that was something of a coin flip. But in my opinion, the best player available at the end of the day would have been Adrian Kempe.
All right, let's trot on over to the Stallions pick now, and they went with Sami Niku. You're going with another player, but an honorable mention to a Western Canadian kid, so I like that.
Yeah, so Sami Niku is a player who, as Brennen mentioned in the live show, has been derailed a bit by injury, but should have a lot of opportunity in Winnipeg going forward. They have a blue line that has some holes and some opportunity there. But for me, I liked from the Stallions, I liked quite a few of their players that maybe as much or more than Niku. Maybe I've lost a little bit of faith in Niku. I don't know how he's going to bounce back from injury and if he's going to live up to his offensive potential that we've seen when he first came over and was AHL Defenseman of the Year one season. Maybe he lives up to that. But if not, I think the sure thing there, and this is kind of a cool selection, is Nate Schmidt. And the reason I say it's a cool selection is because Brennen actually selected or agreed in a trade to select Braden McNabb from the Stingrays. And he did that and announced it on the live show saying, hey, we need that experience from an expansion player who is part of Vegas coming to the Bentley Jacks. We want his experience, what he'll bring to the virtual dressing room as a former member of an expansion draft and an expansion franchise in Vegas. And Nate Schmidt obviously was one of the big characters there in Vegas before he ended up in Vancouver, but he's got a bigger contract again, north of $4 million. But I think Nate Schmidt, and he's one of those defensemen, kind of like a Jacob Slavin type guy too. I know Brennan mentioned that they're better in real life than they are in fantasy. They don't hit a lot of the fantasy categories as much as the UFHL tries to mirror and emulate the real world for player value. Those are some of the guys that we're trying to find categories: blocked shots, shorthanded time on ice, something to get those players like a Jacob Slavin or a Nate Schmidt some more value. And Nate Schmidt was the guy there that I think was more of a sure thing than Sami Niku. And the honorable mention for me is a guy who's actually an unrestricted free agent this offseason. And I think a change of scenery might help him get some more opportunity too. And that's Joe Hicketts, who I really liked. Got to know him really well when he was in Victoria with the rivalry with Kelowna Victoria. I really like Joe off the ice, and I hope the best for his playing career. I know he's kind of been a swingman in Detroit, played some forward as well as defense, undersized guy, but I just think he's one of those guys, a change of scenery and maybe the right opportunity. But you see some of these defensemen who come out of the Western Hockey League, Dean, and another one who's in Vancouver right now is Madison Bowie, who obviously was a key part of Kelowna's Memorial Cup team in 2015, and he hasn't become an everyday NHLer either. And so Joe Hicketts is sort of in that same boat, but I like Joe Hicketts, and if I had to bet on Joe Hicketts or Sami Niku, I may have leaned towards Joe Hicketts, but Sami Niku has had more success in the AHL than Joe Hicketts. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I think I go Nate Schmidt, more of a proven player, and again, I think the ability to possibly flip Nate Schmidt. He's got some name value as one of your extras beyond your 23. I think other franchises might have thrown you a decent future for Nate Schmidt.
All right, the very first Klein Cup champions, the Monarchs, and Brennen selected Eric Robinson. You would have went a different direction, and another Western Canadian kid.
Yeah, this is probably my Western Hockey League bias coming out, but I'm a big fan of Colton Sissons. I know he's got 5 years left on this contract, and he had that one really good playoff where he had a hat trick in the conference finals and looked like he was having a coming out party offensively, and he hasn't really carried that over for Nashville in the last couple of seasons, but I still think there's more upside there with Colton Sissons. I don't think he's a fourth liner. I think he can be a really strong third liner and possibly, be somewhere in that middle six. And I'm, again, shocked that as much as I like Kelly Yarncroc, I think Seattle should have taken Colton Sissons and from Nashville. And I think that the Bentley Jacks, Eric Robinson is a player that, as Brennen said, seems to be flying a little under the radar. He's got a lot of speed. He's physical, real good forechecker, and seems to have a bit of finish. So he could trend up in the years to come as well. But I'm probably, like I said, that bias towards the Western Hockey League. I had to go with Colton Sissons. He's my boy, and he would have been my pick from the Monarchs.
All right, the Mystics pick was Casey Cizikas. But the pick you're going to, actually Duckman's Domination had some talks about possibly acquiring this player before the roster freeze, and for the Mystics obviously were a little bit worried about losing him as well.
Yeah, and the player that I would have chosen is Caleb Jones. I think Edmonton gave up early on Caleb Jones. I know they have a lot of defense prospects coming, but I think Chicago's been pretty good at identifying talent on the back end. They're going to have a young blue line, guys like Wyatt Kalinick and Ian Mitchell and Adam Boquist. They have a lot of youth there, and there's a lot of rumors, Dean, that big brother Seth is coming to Chicago, possibly as early as today or tomorrow. We could see Seth Jones traded from Columbus to Chicago for the Jones brothers, Seth and Caleb. But I think from the Mystics, the potential is still there with Caleb Jones. I think he's still an NHL player. I really liked him in Edmonton. Obviously, a couple mistakes here and there and some things, Jim Playfair, the assistant coach that runs the defense, I don't think he was a big fan of the risk reward in Caleb Jones's game. He likes a safer defenseman, and it just ultimately the defense coach and the head coach decided Caleb Jones wasn't a great fit there, and they obviously love the experience of Duncan Keith, and I think that trade will work out just fine for Edmonton. But I haven't given up hope on Caleb Jones, and I would have selected him, taking a chance on Caleb Jones over Casey Cizikas, although you have to admit Casey Cizikas is the more proven player, good contract. Forwards tend to have a little bit more value per player in the UFHL. They tend to produce a little more than defensemen. So I can't knock that pick with Casey Cizikas. But my heart was, when I did my mock draft, the name that popped for me from the Mystics was Caleb Jones.
Well, and so much of this is about contracts too, right? And making sure, Brennen doesn't have to fit under the cap now, but he will have to eventually. And so having those good contracts is so very important. All right, now let's move to the Titans. Nick Ritchie is the player that the Bentley Jacks selected. Who would Larry have selected?
So in a similar tone to Caleb Jones, another young defenseman who hasn't quite popped the way I thought he would in the NHL, but still, under 25 or around that 25 age, who I think has untapped upside and who I really think at some point is going to take the next step is Travis Dermott from the Toronto Maple Leafs. I know Jacob Cambridge is a Leafs fan, so he was probably hoping that Travis Dermott wouldn't be the selection. And in his case, it ended up being Nick Ritchie that Brennan Kopp took. And again, I think this is a similar situation, Dean. I look at Casey Cizikas and Nick Ritchie. We talk about this a lot in the Telegram and in the UFHL, but hits, penalty minutes, these players that are physical players tend to have the most value or value above maybe real world value at the moment with the UFHL scoring system. So you're looking at guys that shoot the puck a lot, hit a lot, and get their share of penalty minutes. Nick Ritchie fits that mold. He's got he had a good season in Boston, and he's still really just in his prime as a budding power forward too. So a great pick. But again, my eye, when I looked at the protected list for the Titans, the name that popped for me was Travis Dermott for the same reason as Caleb Jones. I think those were young defensemen that I would have taken a chance on, thinking there's more to come from Caleb Jones and Travis Dermott.
Okay, moving on now to the Warriors. The Warriors did it. Brendan selects Gustav Nyquist. Larry selects somebody else.
Yeah, so this one actually kind of surprised me from Brennan. Now, there was two players here that I really thought Brennan would take a look at. One was Adam Brooks, who, again, former Regina Pad, who is a WHL scoring leader. I thought he would have, even though he hasn't got an opportunity in Toronto, I still think Adam Brooks is another offensive player that could make the NHL and be sort of a late bloomer. So I thought maybe he'd go Adam Brooks. And the name that I really thought that Brennan would select, that I probably would have taken a chance on, Brennan's a Canucks fan, is Brogan Rafferty. There was a lot of hype about Brogan Rafferty coming into last season. He had such a strong year the previous season in Utica in the AHL, and the Canucks fans and everybody thought, oh, he's going to step in and replace Chris Tanev or one of these guys, in a top four, or certainly be an everyday guy, maybe even a Calder candidate. And he really didn't get much more than a cup of coffee in the NHL. Even Olli Juolevi kind of played ahead of him. But I think Brogan Rafferty is a guy that we haven't heard the last of in Vancouver. I think even though Jack Rathbone's coming now and he's started the new sexy name Jack Rathbone, but I think Brogan Rafferty is still a guy that can carve out a role in Vancouver or somewhere in the NHL. So I would have looked at him. For the Warriors, this is kind of I wouldn't say a get out of jail free card because they just recently acquired Gustav Nyquist, but the Warriors are a franchise that are very close to the salary cap. With extensions coming to guys like Elias Pettersson, and although they did get out of jail, they got out of jail free card when Zach Parise got bought out. He's going to obviously sign a lower cap hit, so that was a real nice break for the Warriors. But Gustav Nyquist, a veteran guy who's on a fairly high cap hit and coming off a missed season to injury, I think the Warriors will be okay losing him. I think they probably would have rather given up Nyquist than a guy like Adam Brooks or Brogan Rafferty. But for the expansion franchise, for the Bentley Jacks, you're going to need somebody to play in that top 6, top 9 that can produce offensively. And we all know Gustav Nyquist can be a quality contributor in fantasy if he's healthy and if he can rebound. And you look at Columbus, there's going to be lots of opportunity there for Gustav Nyquist. And certainly we laughed about it during the broadcast, Dean, but the BJs, the Bentley Jacks and the Blue Jackets, there was a lot of synergy there. They also selected or made a trade to select Oliver Bjorkstrand, Eric Robinson, who we just talked about, Scott Harrington from Duckmans. There was a lot of BJs going to the BJs. So nonetheless, I think I would have went Brogan Rafferty there, but Gustav Nyquist is the more proven player for sure.
We all have, or not say we all have, but there are guys out there that get chances because somebody does like them and somebody believes that they can turn things around. I'm with Brennen on Cody Ceci. I loved Cody Ceci at junior, and I know sometimes we all get caught up in loving guys at the junior level, and then sometimes they just can't translate. I think Cody Ceci could translate in the right role. So I kind of like this selection from the Battlehawks for Brennen in this one.
Certainly the fact that Cody Ceci is now playing at a lower cap hit too, and a lower role in the depth chart, less pressure. He had a lot of pressure as a first-round pick in Ottawa, and Ottawa obviously went through a rebuild while he was there. So obviously that means there's more pressure coming from the other team as far as you're on your heels a lot as a defenseman, and you end up with a bunch of minuses, and it doesn't look good, and you lose some confidence. I thought when he went to Toronto, maybe that would rejuvenate him, kind of his hometown team. It didn't necessarily. He didn't have a great showing there and went on to Pittsburgh. But I do think Cody Ceci at that cap hit has a good chance to outperform his cap hit as far as fantasy points go. But I looked at a couple other younger defensemen in that age bracket. Brett Kulak would have been my choice, I think. Again, maybe Western bias. I seen a lot of Brett Kulak in Vancouver with the Giants. I really liked him in junior. I think he's the guy that had some moments with Montreal where he really looked like he's a potential to take a step forward. And then the other guy, Noah Jolson, who obviously was in Montreal, ended up in Florida, has had injuries, has struggled to get into the NHL lineup, be a regular, but I still have hope for Noah Jolson. So and Noah Jolson played obviously in Everett in the Western Hockey League as well. So some Western bias there, maybe over the Ontario boy and Cody Ceci. I probably would have went Kulak, but Kulak and Noah Jolson were the two names that caught my eye from the Battlehawks.
All right, as I mentioned on the show last night, this expansion was a breeze for Duckman's domination because I wasn't going to lose any of my really, really good future players. So it was not stressful at all. And, I'm pretty sure the pick that Brennen made last night is the same pick you had him taking for Duckman's domination in your very first kind of mock that you did a long time ago. And it ended up being Scott Harrington. But you would have actually picked a different guy last night.
Yeah, I like Scott Harrington. I think, the live viewings I've had of Scott Harrington, he seems like a player. There's something more there. And so I like that pick for Brennen and for the Bentley Jacks. The player that, again, when we're talking about shorthanded time on ice, shot blocks, a guy who I believe is unrestricted this summer, has been in Colorado previously, had some time in Detroit. But I think Patrick Nemeth is a guy that is a big, strong defenseman who doesn't get a lot of penalty minutes. And again, another one of those guys who doesn't really hit a ton of fantasy categories. But if block shots are coming and shorthanded time on ice, I think Patrick Nemeth plays a bigger role in the NHL. And I think his cap hit will be $3 million or less again. So I think a respectable cap hit. And I think I might have leaned towards Patrick Nemeth on the spot last night, but I like Scott Harrington. I think there's something there. I think he'll be a serviceable NHL player for the foreseeable future. So either way, I think he did well with Duckman's pick. And like I said, it was pretty slim pickings from the Marsh.
Yeah, it was. It's funny. Patrick Nemeth, as you talked about, he's a guy that, was a $3 million cap hit. With some possible changes, his value goes up. And we're actually just, after we get this finished recording, we're going to finalize our draft list and have our meeting and go through all of our free agents that we now can release. I didn't want to release a whole bunch of free agents during the roster freeze because I didn't want anybody to start, pin here and figure out kind of thing. It would have taken a lot of work to figure out all those trades, but I didn't want to do it. But today is now before the draft. You got to clear up spots, as we'll get into later. But Patrick Nemeth is a guy that we will be waiting on to find out what his next deal will be, because I think a lot of those things that you mentioned are definitely valid, especially if some changes come in. All right, let's get to the North Stars now, not the North Stars, the Norse Stars. And Brennen took Lucas Carlson. You've got a former Oiler, a member of the Kid line.
Yeah, wow, that's a blast from the past. Sam Gagne and Robert Nilsson. It feels like a long time ago, and I'm sure it feels that long for Andrew Cogliano as well, who's sort of on his the back nine of his career. But Andrew Cogliano has always been a real strong skater. That's been his strength. He hasn't slowed down a whole lot. Such a smart player. I think being another guy who's an unrestricted free agent, likely leaving Dallas, I would assume, it'll be interesting to see where Andrew Cogliano signs and what kind of role he gets. But he's a guy I think I would have taken a chance on. But Lucas Carlson, I actually, he's one of those guys when he was in Chicago that I didn't follow that closely. He was just sort of a name on the list, not a player that I'm familiar with most of the NHL players, but not a guy that I'm super. I wouldn't say I could give you a scouting report on Lucas Carlson other than maybe he's a little undersized, a mobile guy, but I don't see a ton of offense there. So yeah, it's interesting with Lucas Carlson, but I believe he's still waiver exempt, I believe. And if not, I think he's one of those guys that if the Bentley Jacks have him past that roster deadline, I think they could potentially get him through waivers as a call-up from the protected list. So that way, I think that pick works well. Again, I look at guys that maybe would have had a little bit more value to flip, and Andrew Cogliano would have been the one for me. And Dean, a last point on Patrick Nemeth is for Duckman's case or situation, I hope he doesn't get the Jamie Oleksiak contract because obviously the Ice Vikings actually chose to release Jamie Oleksiak to free agency in the UFHL when they saw that $4.6 million cap hit, because as we've talked about, the Ice Vikings are one of those franchises that are going to be tight to the cap with other contracts kicking in this offseason, and they're going to have to make some room and make some choices. They could have held on to Jamie Oleksiak and tried to trade him. I think he would have been tradable at 4.6. I think other franchises would have taken a chance on him. They didn't have to release him, but I guess they just didn't want to get stuck where that 24-hour clock expired and nobody wanted him, and they were over the cap, and then they had to give him away anyway. I think they'd made the choice to release Jamie Oleksiak, and now franchises such as Duckmans and others that may have some cap space and some roster space. Jamie Oleksiak still a very serviceable player to essentially you got to pay for him through the free agent frenzy auction on August 1st, but you don't have to pay any assets to acquire him as a free agent. So it'll be interesting to see where Jamie Oleksiak lands. But when you were talking about Patrick Nemeth, that's what came to mind there is hopefully he goes down in cap hit, not up. I don't think he's quite the same player as Jamie Oleksiak, but that mold anyway, more of a shutdown guy.
Yeah, I'm hoping that doesn't happen too. But we noticed that Jamie Oleksiak, and that's a guy that could easily fit into our slots. Actually, while you were talking, I just made an executive decision and released 3 players on the free agency chat room. I hope that gets me bonus points for multitasking during the show. But it is true. You always have to be aware of what is coming, just like a real GM. I mean, there are so many guys that say, just sign Hyman to the Oilers and worry about it later and things like that. But you do always have to keep an eye on the future in the NHL, and the same thing with us in here, or else you're going to get into a situation where you have to give guys away, and that's just Bad management. All right, let's move on to Red Army and the pick that Brennen made compared to the pick you would have made.
Yeah, and now the insider's out of the loop. I don't have my phone facing up or within arm's reach right now, so I can't see who. Duckman's just released the free agency, so I'll have to catch up on the news late on that one. But with Red Army, they selected Noel Achari from Florida. Obviously, another one of these guys, like we talked about, Casey Zizekas, Nick Ritchie. These are forwards that have really good value in the UFHL, maybe even above their real-world value because they get a lot of shots, they get a lot of hits, and they get their share of penalty minutes. And those scoring categories are weighted perhaps just slightly high in the UFHL right now, where they have a little bit more value than they do in the real world. So I totally understand the Noel Achari pick. A guy who doesn't quite hit as many categories, but probably has a higher ceiling, and somebody who the St. Louis Blues protected, and they're really high on, is Oskar Sundqvist. And obviously he missed time to injury to end the season, but he looked really good in the playoffs when the Blues went on their cup run. And I think Oskar Sundqvist from Red Army might have been my selection for the Bentley Jacks.
All right, I just don't want to leave the insider out, so it was Sharmelson, Stahl, and Demers who Duckman's domination chose to walk away from. We have to make room on our roster for the draft. We have 9 picks. We have 10 picks, but one of them, the worst of it, is already claimed in a deal. So we have 9 picks to make. You got to make roster move. We're going to get into all those details, but you have to have roster moves. Can you imagine trying to make a pick in the draft? You don't have a roster move. You wasted all that time, so you have to plan ahead. So I didn't want to leave the insider out, so I wanted to keep you in the loop on that one. As we get into the snipers, and their pick was Dan Vlader. Your pick is different, but it also has a bit of a condition because something else happened, and this would have been the player that was available.
Yeah, so with the free agency, obviously you've opened up some room on that blue line for Duckmans. I know you got some prospects coming up with Pierre-Olivier Joseph, and who knows, maybe Philip Broberg even makes the jump in Edmonton, but you got some defense prospects knocking on the door you're making room for as well. Now you got, maybe you drop those 3 and you go bidding on Jamie Oleksiak because you got a ton of cap space there, so maybe you plug one of those holes with Oleksiak, and who knows, between now and August 1st, what other free agents enter that free agent frenzy auction as other teams get pinched by the cap. There may be some more releases or more trade opportunities to fill those holes that you open by releasing those veterans. But when we talk about the snipers, Dean, and Daniel Vladar, I like that pick. I really do. I think it was a solid pick. I think, as I mentioned to Brennen, even if he doesn't last in Boston, if he isn't there number 2, because Jeremy Swayman's looking good and Tuukka Rask, I believe, even though he's a UFA, I think it's Boston or retirement probably for Rask. I don't think he's too interested in playing elsewhere. So Daniel Vladar is a solid pick. I think he could be a number 1B somewhere in the NHL next season. I like his chances of that. Obviously, the name when you're looking at the potential selections, Dean, that obviously jumps out is Ryan Ellis. Ryan Ellis was actually exposed for the fact that there was no need to protect him for the snipers because they already had a trade in place that didn't have expansion implications with the Bentley Jacks. So Ryan Ellis was already going to the Bentley Jacks through a trade that had been locked in. So there was no point in protecting him. They couldn't select him. They already were committed to him through the trade. So that's why Ryan Ellis's name is there. But the player that I like, that again, I thought Seattle may have worked out a side deal to get in addition to Yanni Gourde they selected Yanni Gourde from Tampa, which was probably, I might have went Andrej Palat. They had a lot of options there. Alex Killorn was there. I probably would have went Andrej Palat, but Yanni Gourde was a good pick. But the guy what I thought was going to happen there was a side deal where, kind of like we saw with Shane Gostisbehere going to Arizona. It was a 2nd round pick, a 7th round pick, and Gostisbehere for nothing, for futures considerations, just to dump a contract. I really thought Ron Francis would have got, a 2nd round pick or maybe even a 1st round pick and another prospect or something along those lines to draft Yanni Gourde and take Tyler Johnson's contract. I thought Tyler Johnson was a guy that Tampa would want to shed. I know Tampa's been trying to get rid of Ryan Johnson or Tyler Johnson, sorry. No offense to Tyler Johnson. He's a great player. Just that cap hit doesn't really fit there at $5 million. I really thought Tyler Johnson with a guy like Jordan Eberle, I thought that could have been a good combination. And Tyler Johnson was a star in Washington State with Spokane Chiefs in his junior career. Would have been a bit of a homecoming to him to Washington State. I really thought the stars were aligning for Seattle to get Tyler Johnson on the cheap from Tampa, where Tampa would actually let you take Yanni Gourde as your draft pick and we're going to throw in a couple other assets with Tyler Johnson, just take him off our hands. And Ron Francis wasn't able to facilitate that trade, or at least not at the time we're speaking now. But for me, looking at the snipers, I think Tyler Johnson was a guy that had some offensive upside still. I think he will be playing for a new NHL team next season, possibly in a second line role where he'll get more offensive. And again, one of those guys, Dean, where I think you draft Tyler Johnson, he's still got some name value. You turn around and you flip him between now and October and try and get another prospect that maybe has a little bit more value than Daniel Vladar. But in saying that, I think Daniel Vladar could surprise a lot of people and become, if not an NHL starting goaltender, a really good 1B platoon type guy.
All right, just quickly going back to the Alexiak, we already have the Jamie and Penny Alexiak Duckman's domination jerseys, because she dominated at the Olympics for Canada, so she would fit right in on the Duckman's domination. So we will be bidding on that type of player. Fits in with us, and great Olympian as a sister. How could you possibly go wrong? Jamie and Penny in the Duckman's jerseys, I really look forward to that photo shoot. I think that would be great. All right, let's finish up with the Royals. And Thomas Tatar was the pick that they made. What did you think?
Yeah, I think that was a pick that was locked in well in advance, Dean. And I think Brennen, and it's funny because I think this might still come to fruition as a trade because there's already been talk of it on Telegram. But again, Brennen with his ties to the Regina Pats and as well as his owners, Drew and Darwin, being Saskatchewan guys, I think the Saskatchewan boy who ended up with the Seattle Kraken, Jordan Eberle, had that pick or had they not committed to Thomas Tatar, months in advance of the expansion draft, had they just went into the expansion draft and got their selection from the Royals, I really think Jordan Eberle would be both a Seattle Kraken and a Bentley Jack. But immediately after the NHL expansion draft, I think the Royals had something like 6 players. It was just weird. They had like 4 or 6 players selected by the Seattle Kraken, just one of those random quirks where the Seattle Kraken must have been scouting the Royals roster more than anybody anywhere. But they selected quite a few, including Jordan Eberle. And the Royals, Arnie Entz has said that, you know what, if you want Jordan Eberle, come get him. He's available. So are a number of other players that were selected by Seattle. So I think there's still a chance Jordan Eberle's in the opening night roster for the Bentley Jacks. But I would have, hindsight's 2020. It's hard to say if they would have protected Jordan Eberle or not with the Royals if that trade wasn't in place for Thomas Tatar. But if I had a hunch that Jordan Eberle could have been available, I probably would have held off on committing to Thomas Tatar and stepped up and selected the Saskatchewan boy, former Pats star Jordan Eberle, World Junior hero, as my pick from the Royals for the Bentley Jacks. But Dean, on the Penny Alexiak front, I just had to laugh there too, because obviously a swimmer, she would go good with the Mallards and the Duckmans and the Marsh. It would fit good with that theme, getting Penny Alexiak as one of the ambassadors for the Marsh and for the Duckmans domination.
Yeah, always calm on the top and paddling like mad underneath. That's Duckman's domination. What is, like, does Arnie just hate Seattle? Did he get, does he have nightmares of a Kraken? Does he have a Kraken phobia? He just doesn't want any of his players in Seattle, or what?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but yeah, as they were getting announced, Brandon Tanev, they've been shopping Brandon Tanev for a while, but it was funny as Seattle was announcing him, they were going on the trade block just as quickly, and maybe that's the thinking that what kind of chemistry is Seattle going to have out of the gate? Maybe he didn't like the job Ron Francis was doing in general, didn't think that's going to be a strong fantasy producing team in Seattle, so trying to distance himself from many players from Seattle, but certainly I think there'll be a market. Everybody. Expansion's a cool thing, right? And the Seattle Kraken jerseys are cool. Can't wait to see the Bentley Jacks jerseys. Whether they have a similar color scheme with their logos, so maybe they'll go a similar jersey design as well. But I really think there's a lot of synergy there, potential to acquire some more players that were selected by Seattle, including Jordan Eberle.
All right, so the Bentley Jacks have some of the work done, but still a lot of ways to go before they are ready for puck drop in October. What are the next steps for Brennen and his group?
Well, hopefully he had a nice drink after he was done last night and really celebrated, because he did, like you said, a bang-up job. He can relax this weekend, hopefully. I know he doesn't have any entry auction picks as of this moment. They traded away their 2021 draft picks, so they're not going to be a player in the entry auction tomorrow unless they acquire some picks today. But so maybe he can take the weekend off, relax, regroup, and then the next phase of work begins, because they selected 42 total players, they selected 31 players in the expansion draft, but through these trades, they came away with 42 total players on their roster right now. 25 forwards, 14 defensemen, and 3 goaltenders. Well, we all know come the beginning of October at the roster deadline, you can only have 23 players, 13 or 14 forwards, 7 or 8 D, and 2 goaltenders in your opening night roster. The rest of them, if they're waiver eligible in the NHL, they have to clear waivers in the UFHL in order to go to the protected list. So you can do the math there. That's 19 extra players that the Bentley Jacks are carrying right now. A lot of them are prospects, so it's probably more that are waiver exempt or haven't signed NHL contracts yet. So realistically, it's probably 5 or 6 players that they're going to have to shed or risk losing on waivers. And there are some guys there that likely wouldn't clear waivers prior to the season. So they're probably going to look at doing some 2-for-1 type trades, try and upgrade the talent as you go, right? So maybe you trade 2 guys and bring back one who's slightly better than either of the 2, and that's one step ahead again for the Bentley Jacks. So I anticipate Brennen will continue to be active as he has been between now and that early October roster deadline, and I expect there will be some trades like that where either he trades a player that wasn't going to factor into their 23-man roster and gets a draft pick or a good prospect in return, or he trades 2 players for one slight upgrade on one of the 2 players. I think that's going to be the next step, is paring that roster down from 42 to make sure that you're into that 23-man opening night roster, and that the players that aren't going to make your roster, they're either waiver exempt, or you think you can sneak them through waivers, or you're willing to risk losing them on waivers to other franchises that may see them as an upgrade for their opening night roster. So there is work to be done in trimming that roster down to get to your 23-man lineup for opening night.
All right. Well, I just, while you were talking, sent Brennen a note and said, hey, if you're looking for some draft picks, I have 9 of them. So let's talk a little bit. And, maybe we get a roster player that we can use. They get into the draft a little bit. And I really like the strategy he has about building relationships. I mean, there are GMs in this league that I don't have a great relationship with. There are GMs in this league I have a really good relationship with. This. And, that's in all my fantasy leagues, I always seem to be trading with Jamie Thomas. It's just, a guy I know, we kind of think similar. And that's what you do. You find like-minded individuals that you can work with. And Brennen certainly seems like one of those like-minded individuals. And now we have 2 more individuals to get to know. Well, I guess we know one of them already from the past, but a couple of teams getting their GM jobs taken care of and shored up and announced this week.
And certainly that's important because we do have the draft, the entry auction tomorrow. So Red Army made a move. Luke Grenier obviously sold the franchise to Alex Muchinski and Thomas Corden just a week or so ago, and had planned to stay on as the general manager. They came to an agreement, but unfortunately Luke didn't chain of command, or however you want to say that, as far as answering to owners above you. He was having a hard time wrapping his head around that. And then he had a personal situation, not related to hockey, related to health within his family, that is requiring his attention. And so he decided to step away from Red Army, and they actually promoted Jeff Ray from their director of scouting, who heads up Alpine Prospect Scouting Agency, promoted him to the general manager. And they acquired, through the expansion draft, Dean, the 8th overall pick, which begins bidding at 4th overall. Just the way it works with 5 franchises bidding on each draft spot, they'll now be bidding on 4th overall and 7th overall. So Jeff Ray's got to be excited heading into tomorrow's entry auction. They could come away with 2 top 10 picks. Him and his new owners will be debating the budget and all the rest as far as how they're going to get into those bidding wars. But Jeff Ray, a good hire there and a good landing spot. And the other one, Dean, is Colin Mills returning with the Mystics. And this one might have been the worst kept secret in the UFHL. I think there was a lot of speculation that Colin already sort of was having a bit of a role with the Mystics since he was let go by the Yetis revolving the Jace Harlock LTIR situation. Unfortunately, that cost him his coveted job. But Colin really is a good guy and has a lot of good ideas. And we knew he was close with the Mystics management and ownership group. And I think he's been sort of an advisor for Derek Keller ever since he left the Mystics, or ever since he left the Yetis. And now it's official that he is the general manager for the Mystics. So two good hires there, with Red Army handing the reins to Jeff Ray, and good to see Colin Mills back in the UFHL, because I think that was an honest mistake that cost him a very coveted job running the Yetis, the Connor McDavid franchise. But now he gets to work with Derek Keller and sort of build his own franchise up with the Mystics. So I know he's looking forward to getting back into the UFHL, and we wish him all the luck in the second time around. And I really think with Red Army, Jeff has worked in lockstep with Luke, building Red Army into a powerhouse and the Klein Cup champion. So I think that was a smart move to hire from within. I think there'll be a day-to-day learning curve for Jeff. He might be more patient than Luke. I think that's something we can expect from Jeff, is maybe more of a draft and develop approach. Luke did so well at last year's draft, but then he turned around and traded a lot of those draft picks for win now talent. And it was a great strategy. I mean, it was brilliant. And then drafting all the Montreal Canadiens and having that pan out in the Klein Cup run. I mean, Luke did a great job, but I think we'll see a more patient draft and develop approach from Jeff Ray, providing that vision lines up with his own new owners. I don't think he'll be as aggressive as Luke was, but he is inheriting a terrific young core capable of contending, despite trading away 13 quality players from that Red Army roster that finished second in the regular season this year. So crazy how Red Army is still positioned to contend, essentially shedding half their regular season roster. But one thing I will say on this, Dean, two things that are interesting. One is that Jeff is now a division rival with his real world scouting partner, Mick Portoni. They run Draft in Europe scouting agency in the real world together. And now they're rival GMs in the Gretzky division, because Mick was recently hired by the Battlehawks, and now Jeff's made the jump to the UFHL from the scouting world as well with Red Army. So that's interesting. And the other thing that came up, Dean, is that there was significant interest in this GM vacancy, probably because, all that young core to build around. And I think it was a good bet to continue winning prize money with Red Army going into the years forward. So as a GM, you're going to be turning a profit running one of those top teams. And including, there was assistant GMs within the UFHL that reached out and expressed interest in that job. But I think as several candidates put their name forward, I think this was a decision where promoting from within was the right choice for the GM. Maybe different than it was in some other cases like Kevin Adams in Buffalo or something like that. But I think in this case, Jeff Ray deserves the opportunity, and I think he knows the talent coming up through the scouting world. I think he'll be able to build around that young core. And really, I think a shout out to the new owners as well. I think the reason a lot of people applied for this franchise, they probably watched the UFFS podcast or UFHL Now last week, where we had Alex Muchinski. Mooch was on as a guest, and really just listening to him talk and his passion for the UFFS ecosystem. I think a lot of people saw that as an attractive fit to be a GM there, knowing that you have such a strong ownership group with the 7 C's Fantasy Sports Corp. So I think both those are good fits going forward, as far as Colin Mills with the Mystics and Jeff Ray with Red Army.
All right, quickly as well on that note, Red Army and Jeff Ray could be getting busy with some trade talks.
It's possible, Dean. I just reading between the lines. I don't have any insider direct source here, but I've been, I lurk on Telegram, and there's been some interesting comments as far as there was a GIF of Bowen Byram sent out by Arnie saying he's on the move, and I also seen a message from Jeff Ray saying Tim Stützle could be on the move from Red Army. And then there was another comment about a 1-for-1 and how good would that be. And they were the first two to comment after that, saying, it could be a win-win. So I'm thinking maybe by the time this airs, there might be some breaking news as far as the Royals sending Bowen Byram to Red Army in exchange for Tim Stützle. And that would be a homecoming for Bowen Byram, Dean, because Bowen Byram was actually the highest selling prospect in last year's already drafted auction, went to Red Army for $800 USD. At that time was the highest selling individual player. And Bowen Byram was traded to the Royals as part of a package to land Quinn Hughes. So if Jeff Ray's first order of business is to bring Bowen Byram back in the fold, I think that would be some handy work. Although, again, that Tim Stützle is a heck of a prospect for Ottawa, and that's probably one of those win-win trades. So I don't know if that blockbuster is done yet, but certainly there's been some hints dropped on Telegram that suggest the Royals and Red Army could be pulling off a big 1-for-1 blockbuster.
All right, let's wrap up with this because I know you got a really busy day getting ready for the weekend. It's a huge weekend for franchises and scouts. Let's run through quickly what the rules are and what people should know about.
Yeah, so I think this is a first-time experience for all the franchises with this type of entry auction. The auction tool is getting finalized right now. We're setting it up on the platform, so it'll be their first experience. But essentially, Dean, five draft picks will bid on each draft spot. So the 1 to 5 will bid on first overall, and the winning bidder will then select their player right there in the auction room. Any draft prospect status player can be selected. They'll select their player, and then we'll start the auction for second overall. The winning bidder will leave that grouping, and the 4 remaining bidders will be joined by number 6 in the order, and they will continue bidding. We had said that bidding would be in Scorecoin and SCO, and that it would be an instant payment, that you would need proof of funds, so you couldn't bid higher than what was in your wallet. And as soon as you were the winning bidder, it would automatically, the smart contract would execute and take the money from your wallet. Unfortunately, the tech side, there's some glitches there, and it's not going to be ready. So bidding will be in USD for both the entry draft auction and the futures auction this weekend. Bidding will be in USD, and the payments won't be instant, but upon completion of the auction, so after the 64th pick or prospect are auctioned off, the payments will be processed. Now, if the franchises have insufficient funds in their UFFS wallet, they will have approximately a 48-hour window to complete payment, or they will have a 48-hour window to complete payment or face a 10% fine on their total auction spending. So if you spent $500 in the auction or $5,000 in the auction, you'd owe $500 as a fine if you didn't have your SCO in place in time for that window. And again, there could be a bit of a delay here. So this is a tentative rule because we do have to get the tech side. We can't be fining owners if it's technical difficulties. So, but that's sort of the idea going forward. Minimum bids will be finalized for the entry auction Saturday morning following the second round of the NHL draft. Once we know the 64 prospects that were taken, the top 64 in the NHL, that will be applied to the entry draft auction to finalize those minimum bids, updating the algorithm, and then we'll get it all set up. 5 slots for every draft spot. As we said, the winning bidder will select their preferred draft status prospect. Only draft prospect players, 2021 NHL draft eligibles, are available for selection. So you can't go in and select a player that isn't in the UFHL yet, but is owned by a scout that was drafted last year, or a future player you can't go in and select Shane Wright, and you can't go in and select some of these guys that were still owned by scouts, but they had to have been draft eligible in the NHL in 2021. So only the draft prospect players will show as available for selection. And that's different from a lot of fantasy leagues, Dean, where your rookie draft, you can draft these older Europeans or these college free agent signings. You don't have to follow only the draft eligibles. But here in the UFHL, we're mirroring the NHL. Our draft auction is only the same players that were eligible for that year's NHL draft.
All right, now that's Saturday. Also a big event on Sunday when it comes to scouts only.
Yeah, the futures auction, Dean, is going to be very intense, very exciting, because last year's futures auction, we only had 9 scouts. This year's futures auction, it looks like we're going to have either 49 or 50 registered scouts entering those bidding wars. And so we're going to put up 64 prospects, my personal top 64 from the 2024 NHL draft class. And we put out a preview. If you're a scout listening to today's show and you haven't read the preview yet, I highly recommend you read it. You'll see the order that they're going to be auctioned off in. And that'll be more of a standard auction, Dean. Every scout can bid on every prospect. The same scout could buy all 64 if they want. There's no order, no draft order or anything like that. So it's just a free market auction. Player number 1 goes up, all 50 scouts bid. It's a bidding war. Once the player's purchased, he goes on to the leaderboard or the draft results. And then the next player in line of those 64 goes up for auction, and all 50 scouts can bid on him again. So more of a standard auction. The entry auction is a little bit more complex as far as the working mechanisms and the tech side. But I think the futures auction is going to be really interesting just because there are that many more scouts, and it'll be interesting to see which players they prioritize from my top 64 and how those bidding wars play out, knowing that these kids are 3 years away from their NHL draft year. But as of today, in my opinion, the top 64 prospects for that draft class.
All right, well, we went out and got Trish a speedier mouse for Sunday for when she wants to do all her bidding on high-level scouting. She just said the mouse we used last year wasn't fast enough, and she felt she could improve her clicking and bidding. And who knows, maybe, you mentioned about Red Army and the Royals, there might be a Duckmans and a Bentley Jacks trade that comes out before this episode even comes out. So things, as we always say, move fast and exciting times ahead, especially this weekend. Larry, thanks so much for joining me. It was a great show last night, and you and I got something cool on Monday that we're going to come out to wrap up this weekend as well.
I'm looking forward to that, Dean, to see how both the entry draft auction and the futures auction play out, and then to reconvene with you on Monday and produce another live show to sort of go over the results as they do in the NHL. Obviously, they have a declaring winners and losers and all the rest. I don't think we'll necessarily do that, but certainly we'll highlight some picks that we liked, certainly in the entry auction, because they're picking their preferred prospect, right? So they're not following the NHL draft order this year. That's different. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the UFHL draft results compared to the NHL draft results, and to recap both the weekend events. So can't wait to reconvene on Monday.
You're watching the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network, UFSN, your one-stop fantasy shop. Get in touch on Twitter at UFS Network. Email us, UFSN@UFFsports.com.
All right, I told you that was going to be a wild segment. Great stuff by Larry as usual. And man, this weekend is going to be so exciting. I love the new format where we draft the pick, or we take the pick, and then we get to select a player instead of drafting a specific player and bidding on it. And the futures auction is going to be really interesting. As Larry has said before, there is not a lot of information on 2024s, and if you don't do your research, you're just basically throwing darts. You know, next year is going to be awesome, where you have to pick the actual player instead of Larry doing the work. That's where we're going to see the real scouts getting involved. Big thanks to Larry Fisher for joining me on the show, and you, the listener and the viewer. Thank you so much for being a part of this program. It's so fun to cover the greatest fantasy league ever the way it deserves. Have yourself an excellent weekend. Enjoy the franchise auctions and the futures auctions, and Larry and I will wrap it all up for you on Monday. Take care, everybody.